Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Princess State of Mind. This is episode 9. I'm Faith Moore. This is the show where we talk about fiction, fairy tales, and the fairer sex. And you guys have been asking me this one question a lot lately, which is, can boys get anything out of Disney princess movies? And I have been telling you yes in all kinds of different ways, but I figured I should probably have someone on the show to talk about this who is actually male. So I'm really excited about today's guest. He is a self-proclaimed nerd. He is a blogger, a YouTuber. He writes for the Daily Wire. He's a novelist. He's all kinds of wonderful, amazing things. And he is here today. He is Jacob Airey. Welcome to the show, Jacob. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Faith. It's good to be on.
Great. So let's just jump right in, okay? Can you answer this question? What, if anything, can boys get out of Disney princess movies?
Well, I grew up on Disney movies. My mom and dad basically just let me and my sister go at it. There was a couple that they waited till we were older to watch, but I love Disney movies. I don't necessarily call them all princess movies when I refer to them, but yeah, definitely, especially the older ones, when you get to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Sleeping Beauty and even Little Mermaid, which is my least favorite Disney princess movie. I still admire Prince Eric in the story. Mm-hmm. To me, he's more interesting than the main character in that particular film. But yeah, for sure, you see, especially in Philip, who's probably my favorite of the human, because I always count Simba as a Disney prince. Right. But you see in Philip, you see courage and faith, and not you, Faith. I mean Faith.
Yeah, that's okay. We're often confused for one another, but it's okay.
and so I find that men can definitely. In Cinderella, it's a little bit more difficult because the prince has little more than a cameo. But for sure, in Sleeping Beauty, you definitely see a strong, good male role model in that movie.
Yeah, I always point to Prince Philip too, because I feel like he's kind of the first prince who's really a character in the movie. Right. Because like Snow White's prince just kind of like, I think he's got one scene at the beginning, and then he comes and kisses her at the end, and then same with Cinderella's Prince Charming. But the other one I point to a lot is Beauty and the Beast. I want to know what you think about this. So I feel like the Beast is sort of almost as important of a character, if not more important of a character in that film. And the reason that I point to it as important for boys is because I think it shows something that a lot of movies don't, which is kind of how to become a man, right? Like, I feel like the Beast kind of starts off and he's not really doing a very good job being a man. And then he kind of figures it all out. So I don't know, what are your thoughts about that movie?
I absolutely, Beauty and the Beast is one of my top probably 5 Disney films. And I agree with you on that. One of the aspects I love about Beauty and the Beast is the whole redemption side of it.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. He starts off, he is an outward beast, and he acts like an outward beast. And then you have, to me, it's a perfect reflection of the antagonist. You've got Gaston, who outwardly he's not a beast, but inwardly he is a beast. And the amazing thing is, to me, Belle's beauty and grace, she draws the goodness that's inside of him out, because he's been living, depending on the theories, he's been living, for several years, perhaps a decade as the Beast.
Perhaps since age 11, but we'll just pass that.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel that, and so whenever I watch this, I feel like, oh, this is really great, because all he had was servants, and so they didn't really know how to tame the Beast, I guess you could say. But Belle, just through her being beautiful, being graceful, being and I mean inwardly beauteous, also right. Outwardly, that really brings that side of him that is charming and strong out in a good way, because he was physically strong before, but then he became strong from them loving each other. And I think that, yeah, absolutely, Beauty and the Beast is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because I think there aren't a whole bunch of like true love stories that I think guys could get into, that don't have some other elements to them. But I think that's kind of an interesting one that maybe both sexes could be interested in. I'm wondering, who is your favorite Disney princess? Do you have one?
I would, oh man, probably my favorite princess is Belle. It would be a tie between Belle and Rapunzel, I think. And Belle, because just of all the things I previously said, and Rapunzel, I think is because the film Tangled is a perfect date movie. Even though it's animated, it's fun, it's well animated, it's got a great voice cast. The songs in it are amazing, and also too, I feel like Rapunzel is someone who was imprisoned, but she didn't know she was imprisoned, and it took kind of like this swashbuckling rogue, to use a phrase in the film, to kind of make her realize, oh, I'm not free. I'm actually a caged person. So I almost see it as a flip of the Beauty and the Beast narrative, as the masculine figure brings out her beauty and grace and her freedom to the full extent. So I would say it's kind of tied between Belle and Rapunzel.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you're saying about that movie, because I feel like Flynn Rider / Eugene from that movie is kind of in the category of prince that goes with the Beast. Like I have Beast as like category 1, and then sort of Prince Charming as category 2. And I feel like Flynn and Aladdin in particular kind of fall into the Beast category of like, they start off in a certain way that you wouldn't really want to marry them or date them, and then through their interaction with the princess they become sort of worthy. But it's interesting what you're saying, that in this movie, in Tangled, Flynn also kind of changes Rapunzel in a nice way, and that's cool. I like that idea. What would you say are some non-princess Disney movies, maybe like, let's stick to like animated movies, that are good for boys, like that have really good messages or good role models for boys?
This is an underrated film, but it's one I actually met someone who worked on this film whenever I was at LA Comic-Con, is The Black Cauldron. It's a very underrated Disney film, and I think it's because it's episodic, whereas most of them have kind of a straight plot narrative. It's very, very episodic. So the characters go here for 5 minutes, then they go here for 2 minutes, and so on. But the main character in that story is he's just a humble kind of farmer, and he discovers this magical sword, and it takes him on this adventure, and he's trying to rescue his land from the Horned King, who is probably, again, one of the most understated Disney villains. I don't even think he's on the list of official Disney villains, but that one is really good. And of course, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, where they're foxes. And one thing too I like about that is Robin Hood was always one of my favorite stories growing up.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that the characters are animals, they really capture the story very well in that. And the whole behind the scenes, and you see this whole idea of in both these stories, of men doing something, or in Black Cauldron's case, a young man doing something that's right, even though it's hard and could ultimately get them killed. And it's really good because sacrifice is part of being a man is having to do with sacrifice, whether you want to or not. And I think that those two films in particular, I would say Tarzan as well is a good one. That's probably one of the best ones to come out of the 2010s, or was it pre-2010? I can't remember. But those
like 99 or like
okay 99. So yeah, pre-2000s. I think just as the Renaissance was ending, and I feel like those three films, particularly though Robin Hood and The Black Cauldron, I always go to them. I guess The Sword and the Stone kinda, but Merlin isn't a very good mentor. Like, it was one of the in that movie, but those would be 4 non-princess films that I would point to.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. I really wish that The Sword and the Stone was a better movie, because I think that like King Arthur really fits into the criteria that you just described for like a good male role model, is kind of like the sacrifice and the strength and doing the hard thing, even though we're doing the right thing, even though it's hard, and all of that. But that's really not what that movie's about. Like, it's sort of like they just like turn into a bunch of animals, and then he pulls a sword out of the stone. I don't really understand why they chose that particular aspect of the story to focus on.
I don't get why they can't do animated King Arthur right. I mean, it was the same with Quest for Camelot. That was the exact same problem.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what that is. I don't know if they're just like, they just feel like we've seen the story too many times, but we really have. I mean, we really don't have an animated King Arthur, so that would be really cool, I think. Yeah, I haven't actually seen. I've seen parts of the Black Cauldron, but I haven't seen it all because you're right. Like it gets terrible reviews, but then I hear a lot of people really love it, so I'll have to check that out. That sounds interesting. But speaking of people going off on quests and men doing things with swords, I know that you are, not only are you the host of Studio Jake and contributor at the Daily Wire and a blogger, you also are a novelist, and your new book is out, which is called The Seven Royals, All Good Things. And it, you know, I haven't read the whole thing because it just came out, but I've definitely taken a look, and it's really interesting, and it seems to really have to do with all of the things that we're just talking about and sort of fairy tale themes. So could you tell us a little bit about your book and kind of the ways that those fairy tale themes kind of play into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I got copyright here. This was on this cover. It was designed by Rebecca Shapiro. She's a fantastic artist. And
wait, hold it up a little bit more because I think we can.
Okay, there we go. But
yes.
This is my main character. His name is Jasher, and he has a mystical blue sword. And basically, the plot of the novel is they live in this land called Cray, and it's seven united kingdoms, and they get conquered by an evil mage. And I flipped the script with King Midas and made him evil in the story. And each one of the kingdoms, it gets conquered by a dark army of vampires, orcs, and so on, gnomes, trolls, pretty much every evil army you could think of. And the seven royals, they get sent out. Jasher, who is already 18, he gets put into stasis and hidden. And he's immune to magic, so they actually have to do it scientifically. But whenever he wakes up, he goes on a quest to collect all of them. And they're all of a form of fairy tale. So you've got Rapunzel's a character, Belle's a character, James, who's based on the Brave Woodsman. A lot of the princes didn't have names, so I had to I had to come up with one. I've got Connor, who is based on he's kind of a combination of the Little Mermaid's prince and kind of the swashbuckling roads from like pirate stories. You've got Talia, who is Sleeping Beauty from the Russian version of the story, which is I believe it's called The Girl in the Glass Coffin. And then you have Philip, who's Prince Charming, and they all have to go back to their land and retake the kingdom. And one of the things that because I love fairy tales, I grew up reading them, I grew up watching the movies, but kind of modern day people have taken the fairy tales and made them melodramas just with fairy tales, or soap operas just with fairy tales. And so I wanted to. Fairy tales are obviously made to be cautionary tales that parents told their kids to keep them awake at night and keep them out of trouble. But I wanted something more where it also restores them to their fantasy roots, you know, with magic and dragons and wizards. And so that's what this story is really about, is kind of turning these characters back to their fantasy roots. With the main villain, his name is Fabius Thorn. He's based on a fairy tale villain, and excuse me, and he is kind of seen as the anti them, and each one of them I won't say it was hard, but I had to craft a unique personality to each of them. Mm-hmm. And Thorn, I just decided he was going to be anti all what they were, and so he's kind of suave and seductive and very handsome and fair, but he's also very cunning and evil and psychopathic in some ways. And I should say sociopath. Well,
sounds kind of like Hans from Frozen.
Yes, exactly. He's but a little bit more obvious. Like you didn't know the first hour that Hans, you know, was evil. You know, I think you find out in the last 5 minutes of the film. Spoiler alert. But you know right away that he's evil. And that's another thing too, is modern Disney films, since Frozen especially, and I feel this way with Moana, they don't really have good villains. Yeah, really, Mother Gothel was the last good villain, and the Shadow Man from The Princess and the Frog. Right. So I really wanted to create a good villain that you just love to hate, and you wanted to see how the heroes interact with him. So that's pretty much the idea behind the Seven Royals.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting and cool, because I mean, and perfect for anyone who loves fairy tales or fantasy. And I guess I'm wondering, I obviously am talking all the time about how I guess I talk about feminists in particular, but people are kind of misreading fairy tales these days. Like they take all of these things really literally that are supposed to be kind of symbolic or allegorical or fantastical. And I'm wondering, like, you talked a little bit about this, but what elements of fairy tale did you want to make sure that you preserved within your story?
Well, definitely that, because one of the things that feminism modern feminism, I'll say, has ruined is the idea of a tomboy. So one of the princesses she's more rough and tumble, more of a tomboy, but she's still feminine, she's still graceful, and she has, but she's strong. But again, from a woman's perspective, I really did my best, because I feel like I said, the feminism has really kind of ruined the tomboy, and so one of my characters is based on that, and I wanted to encapsulate the idea that that sometimes people do make the good decision, because I feel like it can't. I feel like, I hate to say this, but I feel like kind of like Frozen kind of talks about this, and even Moana a little bit, is the idea that a guy can't make a right decision. He needs, you see that with Maui in Moana, right? He's the one who actually caused the whole plot of the movie to get started.
Right, it ruined everything.
It ruined everything, and so I wanted to return that idea that no, masculinity does have positive benefits, and so Jasher, I based him on Joshua from the book of the Bible, who was a strong military leader who had to come after Moses, a great leader, and it's kind of the same thing with Jasher, as his father was this really great king who led a golden age in his kingdom, and so he has to follow along in that, and he realizes, I have to make decisions that are hard, but they have to be good decisions. And so that's one thing I really wanted to capture, is in fairy tales, guys do make right decisions, women do make right decisions, and they work out. It's not like they don't have to deceive anyone, they don't have to lie, they just have to make good choices, and hopefully and that hope is that them making the right decisions will because again, cautionary tales, right? Fairy tales are cautionary tales. Good decisions will lead to good outcomes, and that was kind of the premise I definitely wanted to take back from people trying to revise fairy tales.
Yeah, that is such a good point, because I think I sort of mark it like post Beauty and the Beast, in terms of Disney anyway, is sort of like there was this story about this, Beauty and the Beast was the story about this girl who inspires this guy to kind of become better. And then it got kind of like corrupted into like stories about women who kind of like harp at men until they change, because they feel like they have to, because, oh my gosh, get out of my face, and I think like Aladdin is like that, a little bit. And then, and then it gets worse. And then Frozen is really like that, and Moana, I mean, Moana is kind of a little bit of a different movie, but I agree. It's like, there's this guy who ruined everything, and this girl has to go out there and like save the world because of what this guy did. So I think that's a really good point, because the whole idea about the hero, and whether it's in a fairy tale or just kind of like a quest narrative, or, the hero's journey, right, is that the guy is having to do the good thing. He's doing like the right thing, even though it's hard. And I think, I mean, that kind of brings me to my other sort of question for you, because I know you're a superhero aficionado, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and wondering, so when I think about princesses and what they do for girls, I feel like they offer a sort of blueprint for how girls can grow into women. That's what these stories are about, and I think that that's what girls get out of them.
Right.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on whether superheroes do something similar for boys, because and you can sort of correct me if I'm wrong here, but I kind of think that the prince, the fairy tale prince, isn't actually the same thing for boys that a princess is for girls. I think it's slightly different. And I'm wondering if what you think about superheroes as filling that role.
Oh yeah, I actually agree with you. I think that Disney prints, again, fairy tales and comic books, they are, I would say, they're the two sides of the same coin, but a different side still. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So like you see a character like Batman, who I'm not sure how much you're familiar with the story, but when Bill Finger and Bob Kane created Batman, the idea was he was going to be a combination of Zorro, Dracula, and Robin Hood, basically. And so he's this rich guy who puts on a mask and goes out and helps the little guy. And not from a guilt of, oh, I'm so rich, and so I have to go out and help these poor people. It was, I saw my parents die in front of me, so I'm going to go out and make sure no one, no matter who they are or where they live, suffers the same way I did. And for me, I see, I was actually talking to my wife about this a little bit earlier, is America really doesn't have like mythology, and so I really feel that comic books are kind of America's myth. And not to say that other countries don't make comics. Obviously, Canada has Alpha Fight, but they're lame. The only thing good to come out of Europe was Valerian. So you know, it's kind of it's a uniquely American experience. And you see a character like Iron Man, and I actually read a thing about Stan Lee when he created Iron Man. There was actually a lot of a rich sentiment at the time in the country. And so he's like, I'm actually going to create a character that you're supposed to hate, but you end up loving. And so then Tony Stark was born. And you definitely see that. And Jon Favreau did a great job of putting that on the first Iron Man film with Robert Downey Jr. And so that's one thing that I really feel that when it comes to comic books filling that void for boys, it's this idea that we can go on fantastical adventures, that we can defeat the bad guy. And whereas Disney princesses, a lot of the villains, you know, they're witches or ogres or whatnot, where it's, when it's comic books, it's villains who are out of your nightmares. So you've got Joker, who's a scary clown, right? You've got Nightmare, who is a demon from another dimension. He's one of Doctor Strange's worst enemies, and so on and so forth. So the villains are almost mirrors of the superhero that they are facing. I remember there's this really famous conversation between Frank Miller and Alan Moore, both Batman writers, who were arguing about what the Joker represents. And Alan Moore said, well, the Joker can't exist without Batman and vice versa. And Frank Miller was saying, no, Batman is the angel, the Joker is the demon. And the angel can slay the demon and he can go on. And I think Frank Miller is more right in that perspective. But again, it's that mirror, angel versus demon, a person of light and a person of darkness. So I think that that is what fills it in. It's facing the worst of yourself. A lot of Iron Man's villains are other industrialists who are evil. You see that in Tobias Stane, who is also in the first Iron Man movie. Justin Hammer, who's in the second Iron Man film. And I think that is where it is. It's about superheroes facing their worst fears, which ultimately end up being parts of themselves that are bad or dark.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, you know, because I often think about, you know, when you watch or you read a fairy tale or you watch a movie based on a fairy tale, you know, a girl definitely sort of responds to the princess character and sort of puts herself in her shoes as she's supposed to. But I don't really feel like I don't think boys are going like, you know, I really want to be that prince that shows up at the end for no reason. You know, I really don't think that. And I think, you know, we mentioned, or you mentioned at the beginning, a couple like Philip or Flynn Rider, for example, that maybe they do kind of have that reaction too. But mostly in a fairy tale, a prince is sort of this more symbolic character that comes in to help the princess discover something about herself. But the thing about heroes, and I think you're kind of touching on this a little bit with the discussion about the villains, is kind of that in a lot of ways, and I know this isn't true about all superheroes, but I feel like they would be otherwise regular people who get to kind of put on their superpower, and sometimes it's not even a part of themselves, right? Like Iron Man and Batman, it's not like they have magical powers. They just kind of have technology or something that helps them. You know, and even Superman that does have powers is sometimes a kind of like nerdy guy, right? So I feel like it is this kind of character who is a regular person in one sense that gets to kind of put on this super persona and save the world. And I feel like that's really appealing to boys. I mean, is there a part of it that's that way, or am I not thinking of other superheroes that doesn't apply to?
No, absolutely, and you see that with Doctor Strange, for example, who's got magical powers. He didn't just wake up one morning like Superman and have these powers. He breaks his hands. He goes on all. He's a surgeon who breaks his hands, which of course that means his career is over. So he goes in search of a way to cure himself, right? And so he comes to Tamaraj. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they teach him mystical arts. He heals his hands through magic, and then he becomes the sorcerer supreme of the Marvel universe. That is, it's his job to keep people who use dark magic out of the Marvel of their specific universe. And Marvel, they have the idea of the multiverse, but in his specific universe, he's supposed to keep out people. I mentioned Nightmare. His probably most famous villain is Dormammu, who's so powerful that if he breaks through, it's the end of the world as you know it. Right. And so it's his job to keep those gates that are keeping those forces back closed. And so it's about, like you said, he would just, if he hadn't have broken his hands, he would still be a surgeon. He would just go back. Batman hadn't lost his parents. He would just be a spoiled rich kid, and like anyone else. Same with Tony Stark. If his heart hadn't have been injured, he wouldn't have become Iron Man. So I think that is an important aspect of it, is it can be anyone. And I actually read an interview, I believe, with Bob Kane, where he said that was oh no, it was Bill Finger, the co-creator of Batman, who actually said one of the reasons they didn't put Batman in a real city, they created Gotham City, was because they wanted anyone to relate to Batman. So if they put him in New York, well then, he's like Iron Man is. Oh, he's a New York superhero. But you put him in a place no one has heard of, Gotham City, then it's like, oh, anyone can be in Gotham. So yeah, that's I agree with you. That is one, and that's why I think Superman has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit. You know, he's not as popular. He doesn't have the name recognition that he once did. Right. I think 2012 Batman actually surpassed him in popularity for the first time, and I really think that is why, especially the Zack Snyder film. They turned Superman in the Bryan Singer film before, they turned him into kind of a Mary Sue. And Batman can never really be a Mary Sue because he's just a person who's super intellect, but no superpowers. Right. And so, I mean, that's kind of making me wonder, for girls, princesses sort of fulfill a dream that we sort of have about ourselves, that we could sort of fulfill the truest version of ourselves, or that the world could kind of see on the outside the inner wonderfulness and beautifulness of us. It's very much about our inner selves. But what sort of male dream or like fantasy are superheroes kind of playing out for guys? I think the idea that you can be heroic is a dream. There's an anime that I'm super addicted to called My Hero Academia, and it's basically this kid. He idolizes this character named All Might, and he has no superpowers though. But he doesn't know it. But All Might is actually dying. He has powers similar to Superman, but he's actually dying. And All Might picks this. His name's Midoriya. He picks Midoriya to be his apprentice, to teach him how to be the next. All Might calls himself the hero or the symbol of peace. And he says, I'm going to pick you, Midoriya. And then he gives Midoriya superpowers. And I was watching the show, and I kept asking my wife, why do I like this show? I mean, because it's clearly meant for kids. And she goes, Jacob, it's every little boy's fantasy. His superhero giving him his superpowers. And I think that is what it is. The idea that you can be heroic, that you can save the day. And I think that's why we're seeing kind of with modern feminism, where they're telling boys, don't be heroic. That it's kind of causing I think Jordan Peterson talks about this too. It's causing a a crisis of identity for boys. And so then you have Gillette ads and Harry's Razor ads saying, you know, talking about toxic masculinity. And it's, I think that that is a fault because, and it's creeping into the comic books. I don't know if there's this real scandal in the industry called Comicsgate, where industry insiders are fighting back against that. I call it the SJW infection that's that's kind of creeping in. So fortunately, it's not all turned yet, but it's getting close.
Yeah. So no, I think that that makes a lot of sense. This idea that, you know, that you could put on. I mean, I often talk about the difference between kind of like what makes women tick and what makes men tick is sort of women are they're about sort of internal things like emotions and relationships and things like that. And men are very much about external things like action and doing. And so, you know, what you're saying about, you know, desperately wanting to save the day and have these magical or superpowers that would let you do that. I think that really is what speaks to boys and to men. And I think I probably know the answer to this given just what we can even see about you right now, but who is your favorite superhero and why? What is it that draws you to, I'm assuming, Batman?
You are assuming correctly. Yes, Batman is my favorite superhero. He has been since I was 4, so before I was even in kindergarten. You can see I have, this is a very famous, this isn't the actual comic book, so don't try to rob my apartment. This is just a poster of it. But this is a very famous Batman cover where he faces off against a villain named the Monk, and he's in the story. They've changed it since then, since in modern times, obviously, because this is from the 40s. But he's a vampire who's kidnapping the women of Gotham, and Batman, obviously being Batman, he comes and confronts him, and he says, and the Monk is basically like, why are you stopping me? We're both bats. You know, I'm a vampire, you're Batman. Why are you trying to stop me? And it's Batman being normal, and also too, I feel like there's a connection between when he puts on the mask, he's a totally different person. He's Batman, and when he takes off the mask, he's Bruce Wayne. And there is this idea where when I go to work, I behave differently than I do when I'm in my apartment, and when I go out with my wife. There was an incident where I went grocery shopping. Me and my wife went grocery shopping with my in-laws, and this guy got in my father-in-law's face and like physically threatened him over a parking space. It was all ridiculous. And so I got in the guy's face and I said, "Hey, you need to back off. I mean, it's not okay for you to threaten people, especially my father-in-law." And so in that moment, I was a different person. And so I think Bruce Wayne and Batman especially really encapsulates this idea that sometimes men have to put on a different mask for different circumstances. Like I said, when I go to work, I behave a little differently than when I come home. I try not to bring my work home, even though I love my job, nothing against my job, but you know, it's good to detox when you come home. And I really think that's actually why I really enjoy Batman. Is he could be like, it's like Bill Finger said, he can be anyone. You can be Batman with the right amount of training. There was another writer named Chuck Dixon who wrote Batman Forever. Drew Batman Forever. He said something similar. And also, too, Batman has gone through an evolution that other comic book characters really haven't. Superman's pretty much the same. Spider-Man's pretty much the same. Batman has actually evolved and has been adapted in other mediums. I believe even the Japanese love Batman. They have all kinds of Batman books that are translated in Japanese just because he is such a popular character.
Yeah. So what would you say then to all of these people that would call Batman and Superman and all these guys toxic males?
Well, I would say Batman fights toxic males. He is not one. And because I remember there's this bizarre piece that being a nerd, I follow a lot of nerd periodicals, and there's one called Comic Book Resources, and they wrote a piece about the sexuality of the Joker. And it's like, the Joker is a crazy, psychopathic, sadistic killer. and who literally at one point kidnaps one of Batman's sidekicks and tortures him and then murders him. It's like, I don't care if the Joker is gay or straight or Q, I don't care. And
it doesn't really have anything to do with his sexuality.
Exactly. And so I really don't care what his sexuality is. And what made it worse is they put a picture of Jared Leto as the Joker, which that only made me hate the article even more. But anyway, long story short, I feel that someone who's willing to go in, who's every day willing to die and not use a gun. This is one reason I think Batman really hasn't been hit is he doesn't use a gun. Not because he's anti-gun. He lets Commissioner Gordon use a gun. It's because he doesn't feel like he's the executioner. He's the crime fighter, but he's not the executioner. And I think that kind of restraint is worth it. And you also see he's willing to put aside. He's constantly offered happiness from women who are like, if you just give up being Batman, we'll give you happiness. And he said, and he is always like, no, I can't give up being Batman because it's what I'm supposed to do. And then that idea of sacrifice, of doing what's best. And so I really don't see those things as toxic. You know, sometimes he can be a bad mentor, clearly, and he's had several Robins, and some of them have turned out pretty terrible. And so it's not to say that Batman has faults, but I think it's his faults that make him strong in the end.
Yeah, I think that's obviously true. And so then I guess my next question then is, why do you think these characters, since that's so clearly true, and since particularly in these superhero stories, there are two men facing off, and so it's so obvious that one of them is a bad man and the other one is a good man, and that they're both men. So why do you think these characters, like superheroes or even, Disney princes and Disney princesses, why do you think they're under attack right now?
Well, because again, it goes against the modern feminists think that for a woman to be heroic, the man cannot be heroic, and that's absolutely ridiculous. And I guess they don't understand that those things aren't mutually exclusive. So for Batgirl, for one of Batman's sidekicks, for her to be heroic, they give her her own solo story. She has her own comic book, which is really good, by the way. It's nothing against these writers or artists. It's a really good solo story, but they took her out of the Batman family and made her her own because they thought the fact that she has to take orders from Batman makes her less heroic. But no, and of course, forgetting, of course, that there's all these Robins that obey Batman's orders. But part of the reason for being heroic is sometimes you have to do what the person above you is telling you to do. And I think that is part of it. They don't, I read this really bizarre comic panel where the Hulk is talking with this character I had never heard of. It was written by a guy named Al Ewing. And she was talking about how the Hulk is the embodiment of toxic masculinity. And I'm kind of like, well, okay, I guess I could see that. But what makes the Hulk is the fact that people just won't leave him alone. And that's all he wants in life. So I don't know how that's toxic to just want to be left alone. And then when you're made angry, you turn. But I think that has something to do with it, is they think that men and women can't be heroic side by side. Women need their own stories, their own adventures. And I think that that idea has kind of, and there's nothing wrong with obviously, I'm going to go see Captain Marvel opening night. But I think they're mistaking the idea that these characters can work together and be stronger because of it. But they see, if Batman is heroic in his comic and Batgirl is one of his sidekicks, then she's not really being heroic. It's really Batman doing all the heroing. And I think and again, it goes back to the idea that maleness, the idea that men have a fantasy of wanting to be a hero, that is bad. And it's not. And I think that's why they've come under attack. And Marvel is the worst. DC isn't quite as bad, but Marvel is the worst. They've really adapted it. They killed off Tony Stark for a while, replaced him with a female character who was just incredibly poorly written. You can tell they just hired a writer right off the street. Same with Thor. Now, to be fair, Thor, he just lost the ability to pick up Mjolnir. He lifted another axe, but again, a female character picked it up, but instead of using her own name, she became Thor. And
Right.
it's like, no, Thor is a male name. You could have called her Tormund, which is a Norwegian female name that's related to Thor. And Thor, he became Odin's son, so he just went by his last name basically. And the fans reacted so poorly to this, and so now they're trying to bring it back. Like they brought Thor back. Oh, Tony Stark wasn't really dead; he was just in a coma. You know, all the typical. This is how we bring characters back. It was very soap opera-ish. So they're trying to edge it back in, but we'll have to wait and see, because the fans have not been reacting well to this infection, as I called it earlier.
Yeah, I mean, but that's actually really great to hear, because a lot of times I sort of wonder, you know, how can we take these characters back? And I really think that's the answer, is that the fans have to kind of speak up, and they have to say, we don't like this. I mean, because you're right, that sounds ridiculous. Why? I mean, why should a female superhero have to be Thor? Like, why can't she have, like, it's almost, that's anti-feminist, right? Like she should get to have her own name and her own thing, and she shouldn't have to wield Thor's hammer. She should get her own special hammer or whatever. You know, I think that's great that the fans are kind of speaking up. I mean, what do you think? What is the way, do you think, to sort of take back these characters, not necessarily just superheroes, but these characters that are kind of coming under attack from modern feminism?
Well, I think the fans need to continue to speak out, because DC has like I said, DC has backtracked. Marvel has backtracked a little bit, but it's still happening. You'll see, and also to support indie comic book creators, because you've got Ethan Van Sciver who has Jawbreakers. You've got Mark Miller, who has Lone Star. Martina Makota, who has Lady Alchemy. And so I would say support those characters as well, and let in the case of Disney princesses, and let them know that the problem with Disney right now is Disney has such a name recognition. No matter what movie they put out, it's always going to make money. But comic books is a little different, because it's still kind of seen as a niche thing. Like, even if you like the movies, you might not go out and buy a comic book.
Right.
So comic books are still kind of seen as niche. So that's kind of an advantage the fans have. I actually got into an argument, because whenever the Marvel was doing all these diversity stuff, I had because I said SJWs don't buy comic books. And a friend of mine who's not an SJW, but kind of supports their cause, he was like, no, that's not true. They buy comic books. And I said, okay, then why are the sales going down? Because if this was a, and that's one thing too, is they're trying to placate to a fan base that isn't there. And with Disney princess films, fans have a little bit of a disadvantage there. But I think that, especially with Frozen, people just had let it go fatigue. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be as big a success, but I think that's what just the fans need to continue to speak out. Rapunzel, you know, it's funny, because every time I watch Frozen, when I first saw Frozen, I loved it, and it's just like the more I watch it, the less I like it. Yes. But the more I like Tangled and The Princess and the Frog, because they were kind of the last two real Disney princess films.
For sure.
So I think that's what, just keep speaking out, and also make comparisons. Any industry hates it when you do that. Oh, the Mac 2 was better than the Mac 1, and then same with the Tangled was better than Frozen, or Moana, whatever your choice is. Say clearly this movie was better. So I say keep going with that, because this won't be able to sustain itself if the fans bite back, as it were.
Yeah, no, I really agree with that, and I think you're right that Disney, it's a little harder because they're so huge, and also because just there's so much out there about how horrible the princesses are, and then people don't know it's not true, so they sort of say, like, no, we can't let our daughters watch this. But I think you're right, like, people need to speak up, and I hope that they will. We are almost out of time, but I have one last very silly question for you, which is, pair up a Disney princess with a superhero. Which Disney princess and which superhero should get married?
You know, believe it or not, I have thought about this.
I thought maybe if anyone had, I thought maybe.
I think honestly, I would like to see, and I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to say Batman, And
Okay.
I would compare him probably with Bell, because Batman is definitely that Beast character, like what you were saying earlier, between the Beast and Flynn. And I think that one of the problems again is with Batman is one of the reasons he can't really find a girlfriend is they can't really accept him as Batman, and Bell accepts the Beast as he is, and then he changes because of her, and he changes for the good. And I really think that Bell would have that similar impact on a grim and brooding Bruce Wayne. So I'm gonna go with that definitely, because it is a classic Beauty and the Beast story. Just in this case, I guess the prince was always handsome, but she might be able to at least get him to take less risk, less and play it a little bit more safer when he's out in the field.
I think that's a good one. I second that. That's a good matchup. All right, so we're out of time, but I definitely want you to tell everyone, first of all, where to find your book and where to find you. And all of the stuff that you're about to say is also in the description of this video. So if you don't catch it all now, you can check there. But please do also just tell us.
You can find me. I'm pretty much everywhere on Instagram. Not Instagram specifically. I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram. It's real.jacob.airey. Twitter is @realjacobairey, but no dots. Facebook is author Jacob Airey. My blog is jacobairey.blog. My YouTube channel is Studio Jake. I used to be bi-weekly, but now I'm just weekly. And you can find my novel on Amazon. Just search The Seven Royals, All Good Things, or search my name, Jacob Airey, and it'll pop up along with my paranormal novel, my very first novel, Cacophony, which is very different, by the way. This is a fairy tale based fantasy. Cacophony is a paranormal novel about angels and demons. So very different content, but you can find them both there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. I really appreciate it. So thanks for being on the show. And for those of you watching, don't forget to hit the bell that, I don't know, sends you notifications or something, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. We will be back in about, I think it's in about a week and a half. We'll be back on Wednesday, I think it's the 6th, talking more about princesses. So tune in and subscribe, and thank you, Jacob, for being here. See you later. Bye.
Thank you for having me.